Hello and welcome to Read All About It, the podcast where people talk about their favourite and not so favourite books. Join me, Paul Cuddihy, as I take each guest on the literary journey of their life, from their most cherished childhood read and a book they'd recommend to anyone, to the book they couldn't be paid to read again, and much more in between. So listen, enjoy, subscribe and spread the word about the Read All About It podcast. My guest on the latest Read All About It podcast is Theresa Talbot, who is a BBC Radio Scotland presenter, best known as the voice of Traffic and Travel and as the former presenter of the Beechgrove Potting Shed. Having studied economic history at Glasgow University, where she gained an honours degree, she tried numerous careers, including library assistant, medical rep and Pepsi Challenge Girl, an intriguing addition to her CV that we might explore further in the podcast, before embarking on a career in radio. Theresa's broadcasting career has been a varied one. She was a freelance comedy writer for BBC Radio Scotland, has produced music documentaries for both Radio Scotland and Radio 2, and even sang for children in need. Theresa is also an author, writing 3 crime novels featuring investigative journalist Oonagh O'Neil, The Lost Children, Keep Her Silent and The Quiet Ones, as well as This Is What I Look Like, a memoir of her life and career. Theresa, thanks for joining us on the Read All About It podcast.
Oh, I'm so chuffed to be asked.
Obviously, I wanted to speak to you, I think primarily as an author as well, but I know just from even seeing you on Twitter, you know, a voracious reader as well. And I suppose the two things go hand in hand.
Yeah, I'm always suspicious if a writer says that they've got no time to read. Most writers read so much, and I read someone had said a couple of weeks ago or a couple of months ago that they never ever read, but they decided they wanted to write a crime novel as a retirement fund or. And I thought, crikey, how can you write if you've never read? It seemed bizarre to me. So yeah, I devour books, and I read somewhere today. The description was a book hangover. When you wake up in the morning, you're so tired because you've been reading the book and you just can't go to sleep. So I've got a book hangover today. Right. I've also got a slight wine hangover. But it's a book hangover. Well, the book hangover doesn't have a horrible taste in your mouth.
I mean, it's interesting because anytime you ever read of any advice for writers, it's like
just read
and write. I mean, it is the strangest thing if somebody
read some more. And when I'm stuck, I mean, I teach creative writing workshops, and one of the it's not a module because it's stuff I do myself, but one of the topics we cover is writer's block. And we say there's no such thing as writer's block. So when I get writer's block, that there's no such thing, what I do is I just go and grab any book and I start reading it. And I read for a couple of pages and then I go back and I start writing. So I read more than I write.
Right. You don't have a go-to book in that situation?
Not really. I just pick up a book, any book off my bookshelf, and it depends. Oh, this sounds a bit naff. I'm sort of rambling now, but it kind of depends what I'm writing and what style, so I'll sort of know. And it's not to copy that other book, it's to get inspiration, or it's to sort of just get myself in a kind of flow. Do you know?
Yeah.
Does that sound daft? It's almost like if you're cooking. I love to cook. If I was cooking something and I didn't really know and I was stuck and I wasn't quite sure what to throw in the recipe, I might go and eat something to get a taste in my mouth. Does that sound weird? It's like to whet my appetite.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. That's an interesting way of approaching it.
I just thought of that, and if I listen back to it, I'll think, oh my God, women, what are you talking about? Can I blame my hangover because I'm talking nonsense? No, I go to books and I'll just pick up. Not necessarily at the start of a chapter, I'll just open a book, read a couple of pages, just to get me into the flow of dialogue and narrative and action, and then it's interesting.
I agree with you, because sometimes, you know, you read a book and it's almost perfect and you think, that's a standard that I'm never going to achieve. But I like that, because I think, well, you've got to try and attain some.
Do you know what?
But the other side of that is if you read a book where you think, I can write better.
I'm so glad you said that, because that's how I feel. And you sway between thinking, oh my goodness, how did this go on the shelves? Or thinking, I can never ever be as good as that, and it does feel slightly intimidating, but it's always good to just try and improve and keep working at writing. And I think if you, well for me anyway, learning by my mistakes and the errors, and thinking, like my first book, The Lost Children, but I think it first came out as Penance, and then it was kind of updated and re-edited and what have you. But when I think back to when I first wrote that many years ago, long before it was published, I wrote it and put it in a drawer somewhere. looking back to its first form, I would say to anyone starting to write, please don't worry if your first draft is terrible, because it was awful. I mean, I can't tell you how bad it was. And then the second book, although it doesn't get any easier, there's all that neurosis, like, oh, this is rubbish, I'm terrible, I'm hopeless, and you reach that kind of muddle in the middle and you think, what the hell am I doing? I don't even know what this book's about, and where did he come from? I thought I killed him off, you know, and sometimes you do. Sometimes I'm writing and I've got a character doing something and I think, oh, bloody hell, I killed him 3 chapters ago. Oh, what am I going to do? So I have to kind of swap things round. But in the back of my mind, I'm thinking back to what my editor said about the way things should be structured, and so that becomes not easier, but you self-edit. I self-edit as I'm going along. So in that way, I try to improve my writing. I don't know if it works or whether my writing has improved, but I always work to kind of improve my craft. And as much as I teach creative writing workshops, I try to go to creative writing workshops too, because I just don't think you ever stop learning. And you can always learn from other people, and it doesn't matter what stage they're at. You can learn. I learn as much from students as, I shouldn't say as much as they learn from me, because I should be given slightly more back, but you can learn all the time.
We'll probably touch more on the crime novels, and with a really brilliant female character you've created. It's the centre of
do you like Oonagh? I love Oonagh.
I read The Lost Children and thought, I mean, it's very visual, very, you can see it on TV. She's a brilliant character. But in terms of the podcast, if I can take you back to your childhood.
Oh, so right.
The first...
that wasn't yesterday.
The first category is, what would your favourite book from childhood be?
Well, I'm cheating slightly because I've picked the Andersen's Tales, and it was a Hans Christian Andersen book of Hans Christian Andersen's short stories. And when I was a child, I've got 2 brothers and a sister, and they all read. They would just gorge on books, and they're quite a bit older than me. So by the time I came to reading, the words were just jumping around the page, and I just couldn't get into it at all. And I thought, oh God, I must be really stupid. And they loved Enid Blyton, and I was trying to read Enid Blyton books, and it was just going nowhere. And I thought, oh God, this is awful. I can't read these. And I would read the same page over and over again. And I thought, right, I'm just not a very good reader. And they were all loving the kind of, adventures of, the 5 go down to Hollybrook Farm and all that, with their lashings of ginger beer and their boiled eggs. And I even remember the policeman's name. It was old Clearorf. He was called, as in clear off, and they'd nicknamed him old, because he'd say old clear off, and I just wanted to be part of that world. And I'm quite glad now I wasn't, because reading things about Enid Blyton, that she was kind of outed as a bit of a right-wing Nazi. Apologies to any Enid Blyton fans, but I just couldn't get into it. I suppose it
might have been in the Secret Service.
I just couldn't get into it. There was a great comment from a woman I was chatting to at a book event, and I was chatting away, and this woman put her hand up. They always had names like Georgie, but this woman put her hand up and she says, I don't blame you, hen. I'm from the west coast of Scotland as well, and where I come from, Fanny just means one thing. And I remember there was someone called Fanny, and I'm thinking, that's not right. Even as a 7-year-old, I knew that wasn't right. So I bought this. I meant to bring it along to show it to you. It's my treasured possession. It was a book I bought when I was about 7 or 8 from a jumble sale. While other kids were going round, the woods and going out to play, I went to jumble sales to look for second-hand books and weird stuff and weird artefacts and things. I was a bit of a strange child, and I found this book, and I just bought it because it was like a penny or something. It just looked really cool. It had kind of probably an artificial leathery kind of looking binding, and it was green, and it was all ornate and embossed with gold writing. I thought, that looks dead posh, I'm going to buy that. And when I looked inside, it was a book that had been in an asylum, because the stamp for, crikey, is it Braid Bar Asylum? And I thought, that's brilliant, because I was quite obsessed with horror movies and things, even as a 7-year-old. And I thought, that's dead creepy. But my mum was a mental health nurse, and it was years ago, and I didn't really know. I thought that was quite there was something quite kind of creepy about it all. And I started reading these stories, and oh my goodness, I was transfixed. That was it. I was hooked, and it was all real dark fairy tales. Yeah. And I thought, well, you can stuff your 5 goes somewhere with their lashings of ginger beer and their smelly old boiled eggs.
You almost have you had something that the rest of your siblings didn't have. You discovered that yourself. You
had no pals. That was it, because they were always dead popular. And probably because even though I love horror and I love a sense of the macabre, and I like, is that how you pronounce that? I've never known how to pronounce that word. And I just loved that kind of gothic, you know, and like the Little Mermaid, when she, you know, she gets out, it's nothing like the Disney film when she gets out the water and it's as though she's standing on broken glass and oh my goodness, and I just thought it was all fantastic. So that was my favourite book from my childhood, and I've still got it.
Yeah, I was going to say that. I love that, the fact that it's obviously had such an impression on you. You've kept it, as you say, as a, you know, your treasured possession.
Oh, Paul, I throw nothing out. You can see my house, honestly. I throw very little out, so I wouldn't have thrown that out, so I still got it.
And do you ever go back and just occasionally read the stories?
Yeah, I do. And inside there's a pressed rose that was obviously from my teenage years of something very important, and I'm sure my heart was broken at one point. I can't even remember putting the rose in.
Is it in a specific tale?
Well, no, it just bunged in there. And I'll tell you what else I found. When I was looking at it the other night, my ticket to the David Cassidy concert at Sheffield Stadium in 1974, and I was about 10. I must have been 10. I don't know why my mother let me go to a concert. I went with my friend Margaret, and she was a wee bit older than me.
That would have been a prize ticket at the time.
And it was £2, and I found that in there. So that's quite nice. So it was obviously quite an important book for me. But I do, because I looked at it, I actually brought it out because I do World Book Day, and I was invited to a primary school to do story reading. So I started reading them the story of the silver sixpence or the silver shilling, and I'm not sure if you know that one. It's an old folks tale, and it's really, the silver shilling is really revered within his homeland, and then he gets caught up in some change and ends up somewhere else in Europe, and no one wants him because he's worthless. And it was really, so I read this to the kids, and the headmaster said, I think it went over their head, the head teacher rather. He said, I think it went over their head. And I was trying to show them that, you know, you can be really revered and respected in your own land, and you can be you can be doing a worthwhile job, but I was attaching it to the problem with refugees and how, you know, we should respect people just because we see them differently. And I said to the head teacher, do you think they got that? And I condensed it down, and he said, listen, he said, I don't even think some of the teachers got it. He says, don't worry about it. So, and I read that. So I still dip in and out of it. I still think the stories are so relevant today.
Yeah, because I remember going and doing a reading at a primary school, and it was a literacy week. Mm-hmm. So they were asking adults to go in and read their favourite books, and I'd read one of my favourite books from childhood, just a section of it, and then talked about it. And what was really good was actually one of the boys in the class, I think it was only primary 6 or 7, asked if he could get the book to read it after, and I thought that's
lovely.
That's kind of passing that on to the next generation.
That's really, really sweet. That's nice. So that's my, I do still dip in and out of it. So good.
Well, we're now taking a step forward, and what I've called this it was kind of teenage university, sort of formative years when you're starting to formulate your own taste in music, taste in books. So you've gone from Anderson's fairy tales to something sort of not quite a fairy tale, but still
George Orwell's Animal Farm.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't allowed to say Jilly Cooper books, because I used to work in a library, and I found I discovered Jilly Cooper, and I was reading them, and they were all kind of romps, and they were quite naughty and quite risque, and I was like, yes, this is good, I can read these, and it looks as though I'm not being a bit kind of that I'm actually reading something fairly. I thought it was kind of highbrow to put it in. I would sort of stick it in the middle of a magazine or something, but at least I was reading. But the book that really had an effect on me was George Orwell's Animal Farm, and I remember weeping and thinking, oh my goodness, this is terrible. And then I read 1984, and I just think everyone should read George Orwell. And I've met people today, 25 to 35 year olds now, very, very bright people who've been through our education system, people with degrees, people who run their own businesses, who've never heard of George Orwell, and I can't believe that. And I put it on Twitter, and it's like, Twitter's either the really good neighbourhood, or it's your Sunday morning at 2 a.m. when everyone's pissed. And the amount of things I get back to, my daughter's a doctor and she's never heard of George Orwell, and she's bright. It's like, no, I'm not saying that they're not bright. What I'm saying is there's something wrong with our system, our education system, or our, am I allowed to say culture without, our culture, and I mean that with a small c, our culture.
I always think it makes you sound as if you're slightly superior, but I think our way of consuming knowledge and acquiring knowledge is completely different from this generation. If it's not a click away, they're not interested, and then it's instantly forgotten. Whereas we we were given maybe a broader knowledge, but also I think you retained a lot
But
more.
why are we not teaching our kids about George Orwell? Why has that seemed old-fashioned when it's so... Because our popular culture takes so much from George Orwell. Why are our kids not... Of course, if you've never read it, there's loads of authors I don't know about. It doesn't make me stupid.
I felt, especially see after the Iraq War and the War on Terror, which is just a classic Orwell phrase. So ever since then I've been saying to people, you need to read 1984 because it's telling you what's happening now before our eyes.
But it's so much part of our culture at the moment. We take so many words like Big Brother, all the the double speak, all the things. We take so much from Orwell, and the point I'm making is it was the people that I was chatting to that hadn't heard of it, they were very bright people. They were degree educated, and I just think, what a shame that he's one of our best writers of the 20th century, one of the best British writers, and we're not celebrating him the way we should be. And
I sometimes just feel as well, degree educated, it doesn't necessarily mean you're...
they've read other books.
But you're bright in one particular subject. It's showing you've got that aptitude for a certain...
No, but they'll have read other books, but it's now not part of the curriculum, and it's not part of, what we just accept. But we've all heard of Rabbie Burns, we've all heard of Shakespeare.
Yeah.
Why have we not all heard of George Orwell? And I'm horrified that we've not all heard of George Orwell. So no, and the point I was making is it's nothing to do with that people are bright or not bright. It's just that they've not been exposed.
Because I think people of a certain generation, of our generation, would have, Animal Farm 1984, we would have all come to that book in our kind of teenage years, and it then has a really profound effect on you.
Aye, so if you're listening to this, go and read some George Orwell, and you won't be disappointed. He's just fantastic, and he's such an economical writer. It's so tight, everything's just so tightly.
And what made you choose Animal Farm?
I don't know, was it my book that I read at school? I can't remember whether I was given it as part of the curriculum or whether it was just something I read. Maybe it was one of my brother's books and it was in the house. I can't really remember, but I just remember it really, really stayed with me. And like in Egypt, I was reading it as a teenager thinking, oh no, everything will get okay, everything will be fine, it'll all be lovely at the end. And of course it wasn't, and it is. It's just, the power corrupts, and that's it. And I don't care who it is or what you are, power just corrupts. And it's just a sad fact of life.
Well, you're listening to the Read All About It podcast with me, Paul Cudahy, and my guest, Theresa Talbot, and we are on to the next category, and it fits seamlessly into the previous one because I asked you to a book you would recommend to anyone, and your first reply when you were emailing me back was any book by George Orwell. So if people take nothing else away from this podcast, it is...
Do you know what? I'm taking it away because I haven't actually read him for a while, so I'm going to go back and reread some George Orwell. But yeah, I would tell anyone to read George Orwell. That would be my... and I just think it's so pertinent. It's never been so pertinent as it is now with our, no matter what side of the fence you're on, our political persuasion, what's going on in the world. I think everyone will find something in George Orwell. And
one of the other books, one of the other authors that you'd mentioned was John Fowles.
Oh, crikey. I discovered John Fowles accidentally as well. I was, the first book I read by him was The Magus, and I think that was the first book he'd written, but I don't think it was the first book he had published. I can't quite remember. And it's a huge book. It's like 600 pages. Might only be 300 pages, but it seemed like 600 pages. And I was going to Greece on holiday. It was years ago, and a friend of mine gave me a kind of battered copy and said, this is long before ebooks and the like. She says, take this with you. You're going to Greece. It's set in Greece. I said, all right, okay. And I didn't like the main character, Nicholas Urf, I think that's how you pronounce his name. But I kept reading it, and it's really weird that I didn't like the main protagonist. But it's a fantastic book. And one of the reasons it really resonated with me was we went to Greece, and I wasn't quite sure exactly where in Greece we were going with our tent with us. And so I went around a few islands, and I went to one island for the day. And the book was set on a fictional island in a boys' school. And I was sitting on the beach and I looked up, and the page that I was at was describing the scene in front of me.
Right, wow.
I was actually on that island, but because he based it on a different island, it wasn't the same name, so I had no idea. And I looked up and I thought, crikey.
That must have been the strangest
experience. It was
experience.
the weirdest thing.
Aye.
And there was a wee windy road, there was a bakery down the bottom of the road. Now, he'd written this decades before, but the bakery had been there since, the turn of the last century, and it was still there, and I could smell the bread being baked. And that was a school that John Fowles had taught English at.
That's almost like the book literally coming alive in your hands.
I've never had any experience like it, because there are 600 pages in that book. I was on that island, on that beach, and it was a deserted beach. It was just a wee island. It wasn't a kind of touristy island, and we got a wee foot ferry over to it, so it wasn't a passenger ferry, so it wasn't even something that was kind of, there was a lot of people there. I was the only person on the beach sitting reading. So on that actual day, at that hour, I read that actual page, that paragraph.
That's
incredible. Blew my mind. So it's now, the building is now a government building, but it hadn't changed. And I was blown away, and it really, that book really resonated with me.
Because I was wondering, my sister-in-law, whenever she goes on holiday, she always chooses, ahead of going away, and then while she's there, she always reads books that are set, whether it's in the country or the city, and I always wonder, she finds it's almost like a way of getting into the kind of culture of where she's going, and I think I've never done it, but I always think, every time she tells me, I think that's a brilliant idea.
Do you know, it's a super idea. I'd never done it. I certainly didn't do this on purpose. As I say, my friend gave me the book the night before, and it was just pure coincidence. But wow, it's really good. Well, I suppose that's it. If you're maybe coming to Glasgow, read a Glasgow crime. Read one of my Glasgow crimes. No, there's loads of crime set in Glasgow. If you're going to, or if you're in London or Paris, or if you're reading a book set in that city or that, the country or whatever. Oh, crikey, it's just magical. But that's the first time and the only time that's ever happened to me, and I was absolutely blown away. Yeah. So I don't know whether the book would have resonated as much
if you read it in Glasgow.
Yeah. But it was real, and I could capture like the heat, because he was describing Nicholas, the main character. He'd gone over to Greece to become a teacher to get away from a kind of difficult situation back home. So all these, the narrative, the descriptive narrative, I really bought into it because I was there. So I mean,
in terms of book recommendations, do you recommend a lot of books to people, or do people recommend books to you? And because I always find curious, when somebody recommends a book to you or vice versa, there's a slight pressure either on you as the reader, or you're putting pressure on somebody if you're giving them a book that you.
Funny enough, I was asked. I'm a member of a few kind of closed groups on Facebook, other writers, other crime writers, and someone had said today that I hate being a traitor, but can you recommend any other books other than crime? I'm looking just to have a break from crime. And I'm ashamed to say the books that I recommended, initially I held back slightly because it was a guy asking, and I thought, oh, well, a guy liked these books. And I thought, wow, what are you doing? And I was really surprised at my own thoughts that I wouldn't have regarded the books I recommended as women's fiction, but because I liked them and they spoke to me as a woman, I wondered whether he'd get the same out of it. But I'll tell you what they were. One was Anne Griffin, When All Is Said. She's an Irish author, and that's her debut. And I interviewed her at the Borders Book Festival, and fortuitously enough, we stayed at the same bed and breakfast. She's just lovely. Another is Paula McLean, Love and Ruin, and it was about, she's an American author, and it was a fictionalised account, but she did it it was written in the first person of Ernest Hemingway's marriage to Martha Gellhorn, the war correspondent, but it was written from Martha's point of view. Now, I interviewed Paula at the Borders Book Festival as well, and I didn't really take to the book because I didn't like the cover. It looked like a war love story, and more like romantic fiction, and that's really not my bag. And I didn't read it. And then I found The Paris Wife, which was based on Ernest Hemingway's first wife and his time with her in Paris. And I found that when I was on holiday in Italy in a B&B. And I started reading it, and I was absolutely blown away. I couldn't believe that someone could write in the first person of a real character. He's a fairly well-known character. I know his first wife's not well-known, but obviously Ernest Hemingway is really well-known. And she just nailed it, and I was absolutely in tears. Brilliant, so much so that I emailed her and said, you won't remember me, I interviewed you, blah, 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 just read the book, fantastic. And because of that, I then went home and read Love and Ruin, and it was brilliant and really, really good. And the other one I recommended was Anne Tyler, who I keep saying that she wrote Fried Green Tomatoes. She did. She wrote The Accidental Tourist.
Everybody should read Anne Tyler.
She's brilliant. So I've just finished reading The Clock Dance, and I went through a spate that I read everything I could get my hands on from Anne Tyler, and I found The Clock Dance I didn't find it was in Waterstones. I had to buy it. I didn't just swipe it. And always befriend your local librarian and your local booksellers. They're just worth their weight in gold. They recommend things. And when I went into Waterstones in Newton Mearns, she handed me the Anne Tyler book, and I said, right, I'll go home and read that. Crikey, it was just brilliant. So there are 3 female authors that I was hesitant when I recommended, and I thought, oh, that's not right. It's because obviously they can be enjoyed, and I'm so glad you said everyone should read Anne Tyler. But I think what I got out of them, there was so much that was inherent in me as a woman of my age. There was loads of experiences that I could draw from, and that's why there was a bit of pressure, because I thought, oh, Craigie, he might not get that, or he might not feel that way. But then it's not up to you, your relationship with books. And I think that's the relationship readers have with books, and I think this when I'm writing it, it's no one else's business apart from that reader. And this is a strange thing as well, because when I'm writing a book, and some readers, and I love when readers contact me. I don't like when they contact me and shout at me. I like it when they contact me and say nice things. And I love when they ask me about books or the meaning of it, or what I meant with this bit. But what they take from that book is actually none of my business, because once I've written it and once they're reading it, that's their relationship, and that's such a personal thing to them. Yeah. And I speak to other writers, and especially when I'm doing the workshops, and they'll say, oh, I want to do this because I don't want the reader thinking X, Y and Z. And I say to them, it's none of your business. It's nothing to do with you what the reader thinks. That's
difficult, because as a
it's
reader,
very difficult.
So for example, if you're recommending Anne Tyler, it's difficult. So you're recommending her as a reader, as somebody who enjoys her books, but it's different when you're the writer, when you're the creator of that book, because you've invested so much of yourself in terms of your work and your time and energy and your passion into it. And you obviously want people to love it.
Right, but the thing is, right, that's a different thing, Paul, because it's not, I want people to enjoy the books. But if you write something, say, you say, Paul sat down slowly or something, and then you had to say, because last night he was actually at an exercise class and he didn't want anyone to know his legs are a bit tender. I mean, that's a really basic thing, but that should come out very slowly and very, you don't need to throw everything in the reader's face.
That's your skill as a writer then.
But you can't be saying, oh, I don't want the reader to think bad of this character, because you need to let the character develop as they're going to develop, or I don't want the reader to think X, Y and Z. That reader needs to think what they think, and your skill as a writer has to develop that character.
No, because I
just realised that sounded really naff.
No, because I was going to go back, and I'd mentioned Oonagh O'Neil as the character that I'd read The Lost Children. I just thought, because I think some people maybe who don't read a lot of crime books think it's actually about the crime, and it's actually the character. It's the character that engages you, and if you don't like the character, it doesn't matter whether it's, because there's only so many crimes in the world anyway, but it's actually what is good about her is you like her as a character, and that's what engages you. So I mean, the subject matter in the story is really captivating as well, but it's actually her that if you haven't drawn her well enough, then I think any book, I think it falls. You
see, what I try to do as well, and I don't know if I do it, and I'm hoping that I'm developing, and I'm trying to get better at this, is to give the victims agency, and not just make it like, some woman lying dead somewhere. Oh, let's make it all about the police procedural into this, or Oonagh O'Neil, who's a journalist. I don't want to make it all about her. It needs to be about the victims, and I don't want my victims to be victims in inverted commas. I want them to be real. They're not always alive. I'm sorry, they die. But the victims in my books aren't always the ones who die. There's not a huge body count, and I don't want the victims to appear. I want them to appear as, and I want to write them and create them as real flesh and blood characters that you can think, that's why they did X. No one does bad things because they've had a really, really great life. Oh, great, a few will. You'll get the outliers that are just out and out mental psychopaths, and I'm not going to say our country's run by them, but I'm saying people rise to power in certain ways, and you just get out and out rank badges. But most people in our prisons today are there because A, they've done bad things, but B, they've been failed by the system, and it's dead easy to say if you've never been a victim of crime then, and I'd be the first one if I was a victim of crime. Crikey, I'd want to go after someone and string them up. But when you look at it logically, they're in there because the education system's failed them, or they come from chaotic families, or they don't have opportunities, and then it just kind of, it's like a spiral of despair. So I hope to try and, within my books, give agency to the victims. But what you're saying about the crimes, I know that I'm not very good at thinking of really inventive ways of killing people. Well, I could be, actually. I could think of really quite horrific things, but that's not what I want to do. I want to say, right, how is this tackled? As you say, there's only so many crimes. Someone dies. That's it. Yeah. Who killed her? Why?
I'm not sure people would enjoy it as much if that was the basis of it.
Well, some people do, and I sometimes like, out and out kind of really over the top weird kind of crime, and that's a good kind of form of escapism. And people, as a crime writer, people always say to me, I've got a great idea for a book, and I want to just wear a t-shirt saying, I don't want an idea, I just want you to write my books for me. I've got loads of ideas, my head's bursting with ideas. It's actually just writing the books that are the hard part. But I think when you get, and this is what I try to tell any writers that ask for advice, very few writers ask me for advice, but if they do, get your characters. And if you have writer's block, it's because you don't know your character well enough, and you don't know what your character's going to do.
And also your character, I think, we're sitting in the BBC Scotland building alongside the Clyde, but your character, I think, is, I don't know if it's cinematic or what the equivalent would be for TV, but there's definitely, she works obviously in the media as well.
She's a journalist, and I wanted her to be a journalist because I didn't want a police procedural, because I'm too lazy to actually find out what the police do, although I have a very, very good police contact, and he's always on the end of the phone and he gives me great advice. But I didn't want it. I wanted someone that could work slightly outside the law.
Yeah.
And she does things that she doesn't quite. Well, she kind of does because she's a journalist. She knows when she's overstepping the mark. But I wanted her to get kind of things that we get away with without, her superintendent kind of pulling her in for a disciplinary and what have you.
And basically, it was a long-winded way of saying it. I think it would make a great TV series.
Oh, do you really? Oh, Paul, thank you. When do I start? Can I play myself?
Well, have you ever had a thought of who would play her?
Crikey. I don't know. Do you know? Because she's about 40. Crikey. If I had my wish list, I don't know, Ashley Jensen, am I allowed to say that? I don't know. Anyone really. Honestly, they could come and it could be blooming. If someone brought the idea to me and said, I will make it into a film or a TV series, I would be so happy. I would probably just be nodding like a nodding dog. And
regardless of who cast.
Whatever they said, I go, yep, that's perfect, absolutely. Mm-hmm. So, I haven't really thought. I don't know really, because I know what she looks like, but I can't see her face. Do you know what I mean? But I know kind of, and I wish I hadn't described her physically. I wish I'd let the readers decide what she looked like, but I did that in the first book when I wasn't very confident.
I'll leave that one with you.
Oh.
The next category is a book you couldn't be paid to read again, and I know like a lot of writers, you were really reluctant to name and shame because, as we spoke earlier on, people. Like you invest so much when you're a writer.
I'm really reluctant to slag off other writers, and because it's such a taste thing. I mean, I got 1 star the other day from some American woman because she'd read 72% of The Quiet Ones, my last Oonagh O'Neil book, and she said, loved this book, got to 72%, and she slagged off Donald Trump. I'm not having this. And so that was 1 star, and it brought my American ratings right down. So it's such a matter of taste. And to be honest, if I hated a book that much, I would stop reading it.
See, I'm kind of like you. That's why I found this a difficult one.
So
because
I'm not. It's not that I'm not going to answer it. I'd be reluctant to slag off another writer's work because it is just taste. And the ones that have been absolutely dire, to be honest, I tend not even, if they're that bad, I would tend not even to start them because I wouldn't. I would see the reviews and I would read a blurb and I would have a quick look at it and I would think, nah, it's not for me. And the few that I have read over, the years that I've not liked, I've just given up after a couple of chapters and I think, nah, it's not for me.
Because sometimes I find I'll start a book and it's just not happening, so I put it away because I think life's too short. There's other
depends
books.
What mood you're in as well.
Yeah, but then there's times I'll go back again at some point. I'll usually maybe try it 2 or 3 times, and if after the 3rd time it's still not happening, then it's not for me.
If I hate it that much, I would just not read it. So.
But I suppose that gets back to what we were saying originally, that sometimes. So for example, when I read The Road by Cormac McCarthy, it just blew me away. I thought that's perfection.
Well, strangely enough, I was asked this very question came up as well in a Facebook group, UK crime scene or something, or just the book lovers cafe or something on Facebook, and someone said, what's the worst book you've ever read? And I gave that answer as well, just saying, well, no, I'm not, that's not a very nice question, because there's a lot of authors on that. And someone said The Road is the worst book they've ever read. So that's just a matter of taste, isn't it?
That's incredible.
Wow.
Well, sometimes people just get bad tastes, but that's one, you know, when we're saying that book that you aspire to write is, for me, right, as well as that. But the other books where you just give up, they're the ones that you think, right, well, if that gets published, surely I must get published.
Well, it just depends. And I see books on bestseller lists, and I've read them, and I'm thinking, yeah, they're quite good, but they're not brilliant. But it just depends on what people like, and it's just so much a matter of taste. So I'm not going to answer that. Is that okay?
No, that's fine. That's fine. We are coming to the end of this podcast because you have to go back to your day
job.
Craig,
I know I have to go and tell people it's busy on the M8. Other motorways are available.
But the book you've last read or currently reading, you actually mentioned it earlier on in the course of this. It was Love and Ruin by Paula McLean.
It's beautiful. As I say, it's written from the point of view of Martha Gellhorn, the war correspondent, and it's a lovely book. She was Ernest Hemingway's third wife, and she's such a fabulous character. I'd heard of Martha Gellhorn, but this book really brings her to life, and Paula McLean is such a brilliant writer. And I also interviewed her at the Borders Book Festival the previous year, because I thought it was, in fact, because I was just thinking it was the same year, but it wasn't, because I also stayed at the same place overnight as she did. Right. So and that was quite nice. And I had to say to her at the time, I haven't had time to read the book, because I was only asked that day. I was doing another event, and they said, look, any chance you can just do this one. So I'm really glad I took time to read it. So that's the last book I've actually finished reading. Because
this is one of the great things for me about the podcast, is I just get loads of new book recommendations. So
they're fantastic. And again, it's a matter of taste, but I would say, but if you're going to read Paula, read The Paris Wife first, and it just makes better sense.
Well, Theresa, I'm going to have to let you go, because the people of Glasgow need to know what's happening in
the whole of Scotland.
The whole of
Scotland. They're waiting at my every word.
It's been a real pleasure having you.
Oh, thanks so much, Paul. This has been super. And I'm sorry, this little room, if there was any visual on this, you'd see we're absolutely stifling. It's really warm in here, isn't it?
And we're both going to go away and rack our brains and think who's the perfect person to play Oonagh O'Neil. Oh,
well, listen, if you can, please let me know.
I will do, but thanks very much.
No, thank you, Paul. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Read All About It podcast, and I'd love to hear what you thought about it. You can get in touch via Twitter at ReadAllAbout20, on Instagram at ReadAllAboutIt or you can send an email to readallaboutit@paulcudahy.com. If you've enjoyed the podcast, subscribe, leave a review and spread the word. If you haven't enjoyed it, say nothing to anybody. But I do hope you can join me, Paul Cudahy, next time on the Read All About It podcast. And in the meantime, keep reading.